All right, tonight we've got Dean Radin, PhD, with us. He's the chief scientist at IONS, Noetic.org, and his latest book, Real Magic, Ancient Wisdom, Modern Science, and a Guide to the Secret Power of the Universe. Dean's been studying psi research for decades, and it's great to have you on, Dean. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's we've been following your work on and off for years, and it's finally good to chat with you. I read your book there, Real Magic. It was fantastic. It's really interesting to see somebody who's done so much research into psi actually go down that sort of magic road and even the history of it and all that. But I figured before we get into that thing, I was wondering if we should start with some of the stuff you're doing at IONS there. I was reading your recent or some of your experiments and the science that you guys are doing there, and it seems very, very leading edge, noetic signature stuff, lucid dreams, channeling research. I mean, I think that's just fascinating that you guys are doing I think what's the most important research out there now is to start looking at some of this stuff seriously.
Yeah, so our research tends to reflect the interests of the people on the team. So we have a team of multidisciplinary for the first thing, and quite experienced, both in traditional areas and in areas that might be considered psychic. And so my own interests are partially, well, actually all of our interests overlap. But what I tend to focus on is a study we're just finishing up now that involved looking at mind-matter interaction, but the kinds of studies we do are sometimes called psychokinetic. It's mind-matter interaction effect. When you look at the history of that, there's a huge number. There's probably 24 different kinds of experiments that people have done, where the target of the mental influence is everything from photons to cells in vitro to animal behavior to human physiology, huge range. And so I've done lots of those kinds of experiments. But ultimately, after looking at the evidence, you can kind of get the sense that something is happening. The mind is influencing some aspect of the external world. But the very next thing that most people then ask is, well, how does that work? Well, the truth is we don't know how it works. You can start diving into different philosophical models of reality to give you a sense. That's what I talked about in my book, Real Magic. From the esoteric perspective, the reason why all these things work is because everything emerges out of consciousness. It's what a philosopher would call idealism. And that may be true. It's possible, in which case, if that is true, then we have consciousness and we should have some creative ability to make the world the way that we want it to work. But there's another possibility. The other possibility is that when you look at the history of science, at one time, basically everybody believed that everything was being controlled or operated by spirits. Like everything was supernatural because they didn't have explanations for anything else. Well, it may be true here as well, that there are aspects of the mind that are related in some way to our best physical explanations at this point, which is quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics does not explain these phenomena, but if you look at the changes in history and physics over time, you see that the arrow that it's pointing is actually pointing directly, I think, at these kinds of phenomena. And it's still not well understood about the fundamentals of quantum mechanics in terms of what it means. But one of the reasons why I've been moving towards targets for psychokinetic targets to be quantum, either individual photons or the way that groups of photons behave, or more recently entangled photons, is because it allows us to probe into quantum mechanics and see whether or not the mind is actually necessary. So that's the direction of research that I've been paying most attention to.
Oh, that's super interesting. Have you found anything out with that yet so far?
Well, I think we do see evidence that the mind does play a role in what used to be called the collapse of the wave function. And most recently, it looks like the mind plays a role in terms of the degree to which entanglement persists, or you might say the fidelity of entanglement. So entanglement is not an all or one phenomenon. There's a spectrum of entanglement strength. And so what we see is that the mind appears to be able to modulate the strength of entanglement, which is really interesting because any kind of psychokinetic effect is dealing with non-local mind, right? It's not your mind in your body, it's your mind and something else over there. And entangled photons are a non-local form of matter or energy. So this is the first time that we've done an experiment looking at non-local mind interacting with non-local matter, and it looks like there's a relationship there too. So the real reason for doing that experiment is a little bit more obscure in the sense that what we're looking at is something called a Cyrelson bound, named after this Russian mathematician called Boris Cyrelson. So he calculated, based on the mathematics of quantum mechanics, that there's an upper limit to entanglement. It can only be so strong. And beyond that, the mathematics won't allow it to be any stronger. So what we wanted to see is, first of all, if the mind could modulate entanglement, could it push it above the Cyrelson bound? Because if it can, it would essentially provide a proof of principle that quantum mechanics is not the end of physics, that whatever the next level is, it's going to require something about the mind. So that's why we did this experiment. We were not able to go beyond the Cyrelson bound, but we saw that with better equipment, we actually might be able to.
So that could also explain why, you might be able to heal through lucid dreaming or the astral realm, that kind of thing, because of this entanglement. I mean, is that how? Because we had Robert Wagner on a few years ago, and we also had one of my all-time favorite episodes was this guy who's like an expert astral traveler. I mean, and he would do healing from that realm, and I kind of tried a couple little experiments with myself, and it felt like there was something there to it. But it's super hard for me to reach that sort of hypnagogic, like that state. I can't really do it very easy. But is that the same principle behind that?
Well, all of this is getting down to the idea of, does your mind actually causally affect the world at large? Right? It's about, is there something like a force-like effect that you think about the world either as an affirmation, a prayer, whatever it is? Does it actually change something at a distance? Well, it sort of looks like it does. I mean, that's kind of what these experiments are about, but it turns out that there's an alternative explanation, which has to do with precognition. So it's purely perceptive. And it's very, very difficult to discriminate between a psychic perception effect and what might be called a psychic action effect, a causal effect. So I actually think that what's going on is that when we influence something at a distance, part of it is through psychic perception. You perceive something at a distance. The perception alone may cause it to change, whatever that physical system is. But I also think that there's something coming backwards in time. It's as though we have a forward push and a backwards pull happening at the same time, and that's why things change. That sounds easy to say, but to then do an experiment that demonstrates it, I've done one such experiment like that, and then it does support this notion that there's some kind of push-pull going on in time. But ultimately, we don't know yet.
Like a magnet? Like a South Pole and North Pole of a magnet sort of repelling each other, and we're just stuck in the middle of that, flying through space at 1,000,000 miles an hour?
Well, so that would be a metaphorical way of thinking about it, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, so there's separate experiments that look at retrocausation. So this is the idea that in the future, you can affect something that occurred in the past. And so that has been done. There's like 24 experiments like that, and that works. So we already know from those experiments that the idea of now influencing something that happened before is possible. So if you take that and you take experiments which are trying to influence something in the future, you can kind of see there's sort of a reverberation or a resonance between future and past that cause things to happen now.
Darren, that reminds me about that, like the synchronicity chats we always have, where we're trying to tell, is the synchronicity actually a precognitive thing, or are you creating that future?
Right. And maybe it's both.
Yeah, maybe.
right? So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, is it this or that? And sometimes when you reach an impasse where you really can't tell one or the other, the actual answer is it's not this or that, it's actually both of them.
Wow.
Well, I think the way that I like to think of it is it's like a really good synchronicity is it's like it's a reflection of a future emotion or something like that.
Well, that's like the Eric Wargo sort of hypothesis.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm an empiricist. I listen to the theories that people have and try to come up with a way of testing it. And some of it I've been able to test, and these exotic ways of thinking about things, forward and backwards in time, well, there's some evidence suggesting that that is what's happening. And if, of course, the forward causal effects are easy to think about because that's the way we experience the world. We usually don't think about things happening backwards in time. So it will make your brain hurt to start thinking about how you can affect something in the past, right? And notice that I didn't say change the past. That's almost certainly not what happens. Once something happens in the past and it's registered, it's not going to change, I think. But influencing the past is quite different. So you can influence something which is not, in a sense, hardened, right? It's not already known by everybody. It's a gazillion things happening all the time that nobody's paying attention to. So it's those kinds of things that I think actually can be manipulated from the future.
Oh, that's fascinating. So speaking about synchronicities, what would you consider your synchronicity then? I mean, it's probably the most mind-blowing one that I've heard of, or that we've heard of. We've talked that we have people writing in their synchronicities to us all the time, and we talk about them on the show all the time. But have you tried to analyze yours? Was it sort of a manifestation thing? I mean, it's pretty mind-blowing, and maybe you can tell it. Yeah.
The one that I talk about in Real Magic?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that was a pretty strange synchronicity. In retrospect, I'm a little surprised that I didn't freak out even more.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because now when I think about it, when it happened, I say, what in the world was going on there? And I do remember some disorientation at the time, but it wasn't as severe as when I now think of how in the world did that happen. So the short story is we needed to find an office to create a nonprofit psi research facility. It was in Silicon Valley where rents are very high. So we went out into the periphery and found an office park where we could get a nice spot. So we got that spot. So it was mostly empty. We had almost no furniture except for my office. We had like 5 rooms, and I was setting up my office. And I had a whiteboard, and on the whiteboard, I was drawing what I wanted to fill up with the rest of the rooms, most of which would be a laboratory with a certain kind of equipment in the laboratory and a certain shape and electromagnetic shielding and the whole thing. So I'd spent a fair amount of time doing that on the board and pretty much empty otherwise because we had other people working, but they weren't there full time. So I was there most of the time myself. So I would go to work in a certain path and just like immediately go into the office. I didn't need to see the rest of the offices, but we lived close enough so I was able to walk to work. So one day I walked to work and I would approach the office from a different direction, and I noticed a little sign on the office next to us that said PsyQuest Lab. So of course the coincidence is that we were doing psi research, and this was spelled the right way, PSI Quest Labs. And I thought, well, that's funny. That's a good coincidence because I'm doing psi research, but there's no way in the world they're doing psi research like I am, because there's like 5 facilities in the entire world that are doing this. And nobody other than the people in our organization knew that we were creating this nonprofit. So this wasn't like somebody could have figured it out. Nobody knew. So I looked in the windows. It had mini blinds, and you just barely see through the mini blind to see if there was someone in there, because I wanted to introduce myself and discuss the coincidence. There was no one there. So over the next month or so, I occasionally would go look next door. Is anybody there? Most of the time, I never saw anybody. One time I did. So I knock on the door, there's a man I can see coming to the door. He opens the door. He's about to say something, I can tell, and he paused and he looked ill, actually. So I stuck up my hand and said, "Hello, I'm your neighbor. And he said, Dean Radin." And well, I was disoriented because I don't know who this guy is, and I didn't know how he knew who I was because our names aren't listed anywhere. So as it turns out, the reason that he looked quite ill, or like white as a ghost kind of thing, is because he had been doing a Tibetan dream yoga exercise, which is about manifesting. And it works by, for 3 hours, you're awake and consciously, intentionally wanting to get something. And then you carry that intention into 3 hours sleeping. So you do this cycle, 3 hours, all the way around 24 hours. And by the third or fourth cycle, you're getting a little nutty, right? Because you're sleep deprived, and it's difficult to tell the difference between, are you awake now? Are you sleeping now? So everybody was getting into it. So I said, well, that's interesting. What are you trying to manifest? Me. He was trying to figure out a way of having me contact him, or at least getting information about how to contact me, because he wanted me to be on his board of directors of his business. Well, what is your business? Cybersearch. What do you mean by cybersearch? What you're doing. He was an employee at Apple who had done very well and cashed out and wanted to do what he always wanted to do, which was to create a Psy research laboratory, which he did. That's what it was. So I thought, well, that's pretty strange. So then the second level of strangeness is, he said, well, do you want to see the lab that I've built? Sure. So I go into the lab, and then it's my turn to turn white, because what he had in his lab, which was adjacent to the wall where I was drawing what I wanted, that's what was there. It was a shielded room. It had certain equipment in it. It was as I was imagining. So I was pulling towards me this facility. He was pulling me towards him. And so we end up literally adjacent to each other in the same facility. How do I explain that? Well, I use the metaphor of gravity because it's almost as though we're all orbiting bodies, right? If we increase the gravity that we have, we will pull things towards us. We'll start orbiting around, and on occasion collide. We both had strong intention. We're both trying to pull, and we almost literally, we sort of did collide. I ended up at the same place at the same time. And there you have it. So again, in retrospect, in thinking about the number of things that would have had to have occurred for that kind of connection to happen is, from a probabilistic perspective, really small. So it's synchronistic, yes, because we weren't consciously trying to get the other person, right? I knew what I wanted, but I didn't know that it was on the other side of the wall. And he knew he wanted to contact me, but had no idea even where I was. That's why he was so shocked when he opened the door, because he made me appear. So among other things, when you have that kind of a synchronicity, you immediately start thinking about, I think I have free will, right? I think I chose that office. I think I knocked on the door. I think, I did this all freely. Apparently not as freely as I thought, because he was pulling me. So yeah. Those are the considerations that happen when you have that kind of experience.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's a good one, eh, Darren?
That's pretty good. Are you still working with them?
I'm in contact. Actually, I got an email from him that took place over 23 years ago. But I got an email within about the past month where he's, for a long time, he set it aside, and I was going back to do cyber search again. So we ended up not working closely together while we were there. We were friendly, we'd talk to each other and share ideas and stuff, but we didn't end up working together, which also is kind of strange in retrospect. I mean, we were right there. He had facilities. We were doing the same thing. So I don't know, maybe both of us got freaked out and sort of mentally kind of set it aside, because otherwise, yeah, it was strange.
So what's the Noetic signature that you guys have as a research project on your ION site?
This is a survey, which is where we ask questions to find out what are you likely to be good at psychically. And one of the impetus for this was we did a survey now about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, where we wanted to see, there are lots of questionnaires that people do about beliefs about the paranormal. And the majority of people around the world believe in all kinds of things about the paranormal. And in particular, we're interested in psychic phenomena. Well, the majority believe in one thing or the other. But we were more interested in what do scientists and engineers think, but not in terms of what they believe, because when you go through a scientific training, you're either never talk about this topic or you are definitely trained to believe it's all bullshit. So we wanted to know, well, okay, let's not ask about belief. Let's ask about what you've experienced. So we made a questionnaire with 25 descriptions of things that happen to people without using psychic terms. Like the phone rang and you knew who was on the other end of the line. You felt somebody staring at you, you turned around and they saw you, those kinds of experiences, without trying to cast it into any particular psychic form. So not surprisingly, something like 93% of the general public said, yeah, they had experienced at least one of those 25 things, and on average about 7 of the 25. So regardless of what they may believe, they have personal experience with these kinds of phenomena. Then to our surprise, 94% of the scientists and engineers also agreed that they had experienced at least one thing, and on average 8, even more than the general population. So this kind of confirmed to us that almost everyone at some point or another will have an experience which, if they described it and you said, well, what is that? You said, well, it's a psychic experience, and give a label. So it's very, very common. So this questionnaire then would say, okay, a lot of people experience all kinds of strange things that are psychic. What is the most likely form in which it manifests for you? Like if you wanted to develop psychic ability, everyone seems to have some inherent ability, what would be the best? So this is a survey then that comes out with what amounts to your signature, so-called, of you'd be really good at this thing and not so good at this and so on. So that's the result you would get after taking that questionnaire.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that this materialistic paradigm we're living in, I feel like it's a bit of schizophrenia. We've got all the people, most of the people that we know and that we love would say that they've had these, or they know people that have had strange experiences, unexplained experiences, and yet we're still living in this materialistic paradigm, which I think is falling apart. I mean, over the last even 10, 20 years, I feel like it's really cracking open. Would you notice that too, from what you've been doing?
Well, keep in mind that science and technology are completely based on materialism as a way of thinking about reality. And the reason why it's taught in the academic world, this is worldwide, it's taught this way, is because it's extremely effective, right? Materialism is what gives us the technology to do this interview. And basically most of the rest of the modern world based on these ideas. One of the concerns I hear from more conservative colleagues is that all this psychic stuff is impossible. It can't possibly be true, because if it was true, it would change everything and we'd have to throw away all our textbooks and start over again. So that's an expression of fear. And I've heard this many times. And so I remind them that you need to step out of the discipline, step even all the way out of academia for a while, and begin to see that science rests on a set of assumptions. And when you're typically go through a scientific curriculum, you're not taught that it's sitting on philosophy, right? It's sitting on a philosophical set of assumptions. Most of them are right. They work, but it's not completely right. Well, where does it begin to fail? It fails largely on things that we call paranormal, right? They're not normal yet. They're flittering about somewhere else. That includes psychic phenomena. The difference between most of the paranormal phenomena and psychic phenomena is that we can test psychic effects in the laboratory. So we can use the same methods that give us confidence about materialism, apply it to these kinds of phenomena, and we find we can get very high confidence that some of these effects are real. They're not accommodated by the assumptions. That means that there's something about materialism as a universal explanation that's not right. But most of it is right. So you think about the way that science is developed. It comes up with a theory about something, whatever it is. And then whatever that discipline is, it keeps going for a while, and somebody realizes, oh, this doesn't really explain this thing. So what happens? They expand the set of assumptions. They don't throw away the old one because it worked pretty good. They expand it. We don't throw away classical physics. We develop new kinds of physics. Well, the same, I think, is happening for science at large. People are beginning to recognize there's all kinds of strange things associated with consciousness, maybe with quantum phenomena too, that requires an expansion of what we were calling materialism. Because, I mean, just think about the nature of matter from a quantum perspective. It's nothing like matter from a classical perspective. Most people don't worry about it too much, although it's still called pretty weird. It's weird because it requires an expansion of what we think physicality is. So at some point, I think there's a good possibility that what we currently call consciousness and psychic phenomena and a whole range of strange things will eventually be described in a much more comprehensive way that we will call science, but it won't look like today's science. It'll be a pretty big expansion, and it will have to involve the mind in some way.
Which, like you mentioned in your book, in the Real Magic book, I mean, they've been looking at this stuff for thousands of years. I mean, what was it like for you to be doing decades of research into psi and then dipping into this real magic from sort of an occult and esoteric perspective, going back into history? I mean, that must have been really interesting.
Well, the spark for it came from my previous book called Supernormal. So Supernormal was the same kind of idea if you look at the esoteric literature, but from the Eastern perspective. So I used classical yoga as the entree there. And as it turns out, in classical yoga, the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, that he encapsulated the whole process of what we now think of as classical yoga in 4 little books. And book number 3, I think, either 2 or 3, I think it's book 3 of the Yoga Sutras, is all about the development of the siddhis. So siddhi is a Sanskrit term which meant attainment, sometimes translated as perfection. But from our perspective, it is psychic ability. So this is presented in a book that's mostly about meditation and mental stuff, not what we see as calisthenics, which is modern yoga. So somewhere between gymnastics and calisthenics is a lot of modern yoga. But the essence of it is all about meditation. It's about mental training. And the Yoga Sutras then say that if you do a sufficient amount of mental training and you get into a state called samadhi, which a magician will call gnosis, that you are able to do certain things. And so if you want to develop the power of telepathy, it gives you a recipe of how to do that. So this is written thousands of years ago. You could look at it today from the point of view of it's like a comic book. It's, if you want to weigh the amount like an elephant, well, this is how you would do that. So much of what Patanjali was writing about, we know now is true. So then like 3/4 of the book is true. Well, what kind of a strange comic book is this other piece of the book, which is talking about psychic powers? Many things beyond what we see today. So he was either fantasizing or writing it as fiction or something. I don't think so. So I wrote this book, Supernormal, to kind of review the different kinds of powers that he talked about and say, is there any way to think using modern scientific methods that those powers might be real? The answer is yes. So the next book, I took the Western esoteric traditions. And for there, it's exactly the same as the Eastern, except we give it a different name. So it's not siddhis, it's magical practice. It's not samadhi, it's gnosis. But the parallels are very clear. So I figured because the people in the West are more comfortable with magic now because of Harry Potter and all the movies and everything, I figured it would appeal more than a book about yoga, because there are not that many people interested in especially classical yoga. So that's why I wrote it, because I already known for many years that the classic magical abilities and practices are exactly what we have been studying in the lab. We just use different terms.
What did it surprise you and how in depth the history of it was?
No. I mean, the surprising part actually is that modern science is only a couple hundred years old, and these kinds of things are 10,000 or more years old. It's what we have collectively have assumed to be the case for a very long time. And by the way, those assumptions were not based on dogma that somebody explained, you must have faith in this. It was based on personal experience, most of that driven by either meditation or psychedelics. That's where it came from. And that's why even today, you'll find people who do meditation and people who take psychedelics who talk about exactly the same transformative experiences that they did when humans got out of the trees.
Yeah.
What about manifestation and stuff like that? But have you done much experiments on that on a personal level and how that works, if you can expand that out over multiple people?
Well, manifestation in the laboratory would be called an experiment in psychokinesis. It's mind-matter interaction. So you can make a statement then that the experiment we did using entangled photons was an exercise in manifestation. So I wanted a certain result to show up, and we had subjects come into the lab and they did certain things, and sure enough, we got it. So that's magic, basically, right? Because we don't have a good theory for it yet. So I generally view, while I've done things myself as an individual, I trust the laboratory experiments more, even than my own experience, because it's easy to fool yourself. It's easier to remember things incorrectly and so on. By the way, for the synchronicity I described about the lab, I wrote it down at the time because this is so bizarre, I will forget this. So I have it written down within about a day of it happening. So I'm pretty sure that's right. But for other things, like big, strange things that happen, we either forget or we confabulate it or something. It kind of fades. Whereas in the laboratory, we're collecting data, and the data don't go away. And we set it up in a controlled condition, so we know that if something unusual happens, we know how to analyze it to see that it actually happened. And then we write it up and we share it with our colleagues. And if we're lucky, sometimes they'll replicate it. And the replication is important because now we know it wasn't just a fluke, but it's something that others can do as well. So that's why I tend to while you have to pay attention to your own experience, otherwise it'll drive you nuts. But I put more confidence on what we can actually see in the laboratory.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what about taking that out of the lab into some spiritual practice,
Most spiritual practices say you will eventually gain magical abilities. Don't dwell on it. It's other than a few magical traditions, most of the spiritual traditions say don't mess around with magic. Don't mess around with spirits. Don't mess, all that stuff is real. Don't play with it. And in a sense, I think it makes sense because you can encounter these kinds of phenomena pretty early on as you're developing. And they're attractive, they're seductive, right? Because power is seductive. And if you're not ready for it, you could probably do pretty good damage to yourself and the people around you. So I think the advice that comes down through the ages is first, learn how to be stable and grounded. Then learn how to sustain gnosis or samadhi for as long as you wish. Then get enlightened. And then maybe on occasion, if you need to manifest something, you can do it. But don't start with that as a goal.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, that's kind of leads into my next question. I was going to ask you about, now that the internet's here and everybody is interested in the occult and magic and which only maybe in the past the initiated or the adepts would have really known about, but now it's for everybody. Everybody's interested. I mean, can you speculate on how that's going to change our culture, like through sort of like a global consciousness kind of thing, if everybody's being aware of this or playing around with it?
I think in order to become adept at this, you need two things. First of all, you need talent. And so everybody can play tennis a little bit, but not very many people are going to win at Wimbledon. Right. So natural talent, you either have it or you don't. In this domain, I would guess that talent, especially manifestation type talent, is pretty rare. Like maybe 1 in 100,000, maybe 1 in a million.
Wow.
Actually have a strong ability to do this. Everyone else can do it to some extent, but it's quite weak. And if you think about what needs to happen to manifest something, if you're pushing against 8 billion other people who are thinking, oh, no, you don't, you could be the most powerful magician in the world, it still won't work. So I use as an example sometimes, I'd say, let's imagine that you really wanted to manifest a gold-plated Mercedes that simply shows up in your driveway and somehow it's yours. Well, it's possible. Just thinking about it, making a sigil, doing rituals, doing all kinds of stuff, it actually increases the probability that that's going to happen. But if you start with a probability that's 1 in a trillion against chance, you have to be pretty powerful to pull it up to making it happen. So
that's kind of the same analogy as that's why you're like, I can't fly because it's just fucking with too many other people. But I can like subtly manipulate reality through other channels that could involve other people. Like maybe other people are working at the company you manifested, or maybe, you know, they're using the thing that you created and stuff like that. But you can't just like go blasting in the matrix and changing stuff up too much because it's just too hard on the programming.
Other people will notice it.
Yeah, that's how I look at it, is you have to be able to manifest without affecting other people.
Yes, and it's not a coincidence that within the sorcery traditions that you never reveal your secrets and you always do it in secret, right? So that, like the idea today that you can buy a grimoire that has a whole bunch of spells in it, that would have horrified any genuine magician, because the moment that the spell is out there, it's not useful anymore. So all of the practices and the secrecy and so on are, I mean, you know, you see in fiction that it makes it more spooky, but I think it was for an actual reason to keep what you're doing isolated to the extent so that other people's minds couldn't get in and muck it up.
So along that same line, what is the danger now of having this giant behemoth that is the media, and how it has access to, you know, billions of people, and it's able to manipulate our thoughts and our emotions and those sorts of things? And to what end now could that be used in a supernatural sense?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of it depends on the degree to which people are manipulated. So we know that there are professionals who do that. So people involved in advertising and propaganda, the whole point of it is to get people to do things that they may not know that they want to do. Does it work? Well, it certainly works in advertising, right? So if I'm out driving somewhere and I see McDonald's, I want to go to the McDonald's. I need the hamburger and I need the French fries because you see it on the TV and it looks like it's the best thing ever made. So you know that's programming. That's a program that says I will enjoy myself and have a happy meal if I have this food, even if I'm not even hungry. So that certainly works. Whether it works in other levels, yeah, I mean, there's a whole division of psyops within the Army that does that. That's what they do. Whether it would work for something like grand manifestations, it's a little trickier.
Well, I don't even know about grand manifestations, but I just think that, like, if there are people that are up to something, are they able to somehow harness, say, mass fear, mass hysteria, those sorts of energies, and use them to their own ends?
Well, I mean, look at the beginning of the Iraq War, right? So one person in Congress voted against it. Everybody else played along with it, right? So that was a moment of great fear and anger, which was used, and it manipulated our country into what, $7-8 trillion spent for basically no reason. So yeah, it's used all the time. It's used in politics. In a sense, that's what politics is. It's about manipulating public opinion to do things. So one hopes that watching the news, that you look at a broad variety of news, like news from all over the place, because then you get very quickly, what is the message from these people in the media, and what is the message from that people? And you at least can make a better choice about what you believe if you look at the whole panoply. Most people don't do that. Most people are more comfortable just seeing one particular idea that's echoing back on what they want to believe. It's less comfortable to look at all sides of complex issues. And the other approach is that I know a lot of people don't pay any attention to the news at all, like none. They don't watch TV news. They don't read anything in the newspapers. They're just completely oblivious to it. So that's another approach. But I want to get back for a minute to the gold-plated Mercedes, because I figured I used that as an example of something that would cause a disruption in the collective, because it had to come from somewhere. Somebody is not getting it, and probably I'm getting it instead, or something like that. So one of my Facebook friends said, actually, whenever you do a manifestation like this, or your intention is going in that direction, you have to be extremely clear about what it is that you want, because she gave me a gold-plated Mercedes. This actually is a little Mercedes. It's gold color. It's not plated in gold. But she said, see, you wanted it, and now you have it. But I'm thinking, no, that's not what I wanted, like a big one. Well, she said, you didn't say that, right? You have to be more precise. And this turns out to be true from all kinds of affirmations. And even in the laboratory, if we give somebody an instruction, we'd like you to do such and such, and it's not really precise, we might get exactly what we asked to get, but it wasn't what we really wanted. So we have to be very clear about when we're using our intention because we want something, really, spell it out to a level of detail so that if you actually end up getting that, that will be the thing that you want. So actually, I'm very happy with this because if this were an actual gold-plated Mercedes, I would have to explain to somebody, where did it come from, right? And so if it just shows up one day, it's probably not mine. Maybe somebody left it here by accident. So like the next version is, yeah, it shows up, but then you look and you see that it is actually registered to you. Like somebody somewhere just decided to give it to you. That's not very satisfying, because you're immediately wondering, well, who can afford what, $150,000 or $200,000 car to give away, right? It ripples. It makes waves and ripples in the collective, and that's generally not a great thing to do.
Is there like an energy exchange that has to happen, like especially when it comes to sort of chaos magic? Like I know a couple people they've gotten exactly what they wanted, but at a price. Yep. They got the exact amount of money that they asked for in this sigil thing that they did, but they wrecked a car to get it. It seems like it's like you be careful what you wish for, kind of thing.
Exactly right. So that's also has to do with being very clear on what you want. So here's another example. So we used to live next to a neighbor that, for reasons I don't understand, they had a house that had built-in air conditioning in the house, but for some reason they didn't like to use it. So I put a window air conditioner that was just made a racket all the time. So all during the summer, that racket was right outside the bedroom. So it's hard to sleep because you have this thing constantly droning all the time. So I made a sigil to make it go away. And then after a while, I started thinking about it. I said, I didn't specify why it was going to go away. Maybe it's going to catch fire and burn down the house. Maybe something horrible would happen. Maybe it's going to fall out of the window and squash something. So I rethought it. And so I had to redo the sigil so that it would stop. Like the noise would go away, but nobody would be hurt in the process. Well, occasionally it would be turned off. Like, I don't know, it was still hot outside. Maybe we'd turn it off and, then suddenly it felt like, great, this thing has stopped. It never went completely away. It only went away when we moved, right? So here's how the sigil can work, right? I want that noise to go away. Okay, You're going to move to another state 600 miles away, and then you won't be bothered by it anymore. Well, it did what I wanted it to do, but it wasn't exactly the way I thought it would happen.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was talking about. How did you actually reword that then?
I reworded it to say that nobody would be injured.
So you actually put that in there. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But no, because I was frightened. I mean, I'll show you here. Like a reason that I was concerned is because I went to a metal bending party where people bend spoons and things like that. And the only thing I thought that I would be surprised at or interested to see was somebody bending the bowl of a spoon in half, twisting on the neck and stuff and bending the neck. It's easy to do. Bending the bowl of a heavy soup spoon in half, you can't do that with your fingers. You'll get injured. But I did it.
Holy, wow.
So this is a heavy soup spoon. It's cold. It's stuck there. It's like it was always there. I got another spoon like this. I was taking a plane to go home, and I was going to try to replicate what I had done during this big party. And I, trying to pinch it and hold it. And I suddenly got very afraid because we were in the air at the time, and I have no idea how I did this. And so I thought, well, maybe the wings will suddenly become soft and the plane's going to fall out of the sky, because I don't know what the extent of this is. So it was a good lesson in that if you don't know what you're doing, this is one of the reasons why when you start gaining certain powers, you have to be very careful, because if you don't really understand what's happening, it could be dangerous to you and others. So that's where this lore comes from. Then, yeah, you're going to start gaining certain abilities, but be very, very careful about it.
Great point. I do hear a lot of instances, and I've met quite a few people who have had NDEs, and they have gained special powers. I mean, and I don't know if that's just a latent power within them that's been manifested because of this experience that they've had, or was there any? Do you guys research that at all? And did you see any of that when you were studying or writing about the history of magic and the esoteric?
Transformational experiences in general will awaken some abilities. So it's true with psychedelics. It's true with meditation. We've done surveys with people who are beginning to meditate to ask, have you ever encountered these kinds of experiences? Everything from synchronicities to clairvoyance and the rest. Almost everyone says yes. So it's not controlled at that point. They're getting spontaneous effects of this type. They seem to be related to the beginning practice of meditation. For the same thing with psychedelics for a lot of people, and certainly near-death experiences, anything which pushes you hard away from your ordinary way of thinking about the world, you don't come back the same person. And something about the opening as seeing the reality in a slightly more expansive way, maybe does something as simple as give yourself permission. Because most of the time we're going about their daily lives, we're not really paying that much of attention to what is actually happening. We're thinking about what we need to do, and we have to do this and that. So all of that is constraining. It's almost like blinders. Whereas if you can go somewhere and experience the world at large without all of those expectations and plans, it's much, much stranger. And we generally like to feel comfortable. We don't want to go around freaking out all the time. So we create a very stable reality where we know things are going to be a certain way. And it takes a pretty good shot in the side of the head to wake up from that.
Like a blast of DMT.
Yeah. I mean, if you get a DMT experience or something mystical experience or in a NDE or whatever, that's a shot in the side of the head that'll wake you up. However, some people will wake up and become psychotic, right? Even in meditation, a small percentage, something like 2%, 3% of people who learn to start meditating, they will go psychotic because they can't handle it. So there's one of the reasons we're reasonably stable in terms of the way that we see the world is because evolution has shaped us to be that way. Because I think we all have the capacity to know what's going on Pluto 1 billion years ago. We just direct our attention there and we can get it. But it has been suppressed for most people most of the time, except while dreaming, on drugs, and whatever. That frontal lobe suppression goes away during those periods. It suppresses it because it is not useful for us as an organism to survive by knowing what happened on Pluto 1 billion years ago. What's important is the tiger who's immediately in front of you right now. So you can see how the brain and body have developed so that we are very, very tightly attuned to here and now and not there and then, even though under the right circumstances, we can pick up anything from anywhere.
Yeah, I like that. I've never thought about it like that. It's maybe just as simple as giving yourself permission to experience that stuff. Now that you've sort of opened up, you've had some crazy thing. Now it's opened up the door to be honest and open with the rest of it. Yeah, I like that.
Without freaking out. So one of the problems I have with the way that these kinds of things are portrayed in the media is that psychic ability almost always devolves into horror. There's even when you look on television and say, I want to see a science fiction show, it's listed as a genre of science fiction and horror because most of the studies end up being horrific. And so if something happens to a person and it's some kind of psychic thing, it's not simply that it's felt that it's weird, but that it's horrific, it's dangerous, demonic, right? Those are the images that come to mind. So among other things, besides all the other work I'm doing, I've co-written a TV series, which hasn't been bought yet, but we're working on it. The TV series is an antidote to psychic phenomena as horrific. It's the flip side, saying psychic phenomena actually are really, really interesting and not particularly horrible at all. In fact, it's the opposite. It's beneficial for you and everybody else. So it's a different way of approaching the same topic, but with a much more positive message. And of course, being science fiction, it still has all kinds of mysterious things happening in it to be interesting to watch. But the bottom line is not horror. This is the opposite of horror. It's inspirational and awe-inspiring. Speaking
of positive and awe-inspiring and inspirational, what is the power of positive thinking quickly before we wrap up? I mean, is there a benefit to just going through life looking at the bright side?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Just from a purely psychological perspective, it's much healthier to be positive. From an affirmation perspective, it's also great, right? Your intention, your perceptions, everything is expecting positivity. And the likelihood then of encountering that is much, much higher than if you go around expecting some kind of horrific thing to occur. But yeah, I mean, in every dimension you can think of, it's valuable.
Wow. What are you working on upcoming besides the TV series? Any other interesting things? Any other books or interesting things on?
Well, I'm also a co-founder of a company that's using genetic engineering to actually change some of the behavior in the brain to treat anxiety, depression, and eventually dementia and Alzheimer's.
Sounds scary.
It's the direction that medicine is moving in, right? It's if you think about the drugs that are used today to treat anxiety, and actually lots of other things, they're called SSRI drugs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor drugs. What it does is you take that drug and it causes there be much more serotonin in the body. Like it floods the brain and the body with serotonin. That causes the brain to downregulate certain neurons so that they're not as receptive, because otherwise you'd feel like you're going crazy. You have your skin would crawling and it's toxic. So the brain is quite good at this and has feedback loops to downregulate its reception to serotonin, and you'll start feeling better. You won't be as anxious. Unfortunately, it has a lot of side effects. So if you take an SSRI drug takes like 5 or 6 weeks to kick in, if you suddenly stop, you either become homicidal or suicidal or both. Oh. And there's lots of cases where people really have had a bad deal by getting off these drugs too quickly. But so we decided the new rush now in the pharma business is using psychedelics to treat anxiety and depression. Why? Because the chemical structure of most psychedelics, we're talking about LSD, psilocybin, DMT, and a few others, it's almost exactly the same as serotonin. That's one of the reasons why it affects us so much. So if you take these psychedelic drugs, it does the equivalent of an SSRI. It floods the brain with too much serotonin, because in this case, it looks like serotonin. So the brain downregulates, and sure enough, you begin to feel better. You're not depressed and you're not anxious. So the thing is, if you stop taking psychedelics as a treatment for a while, that wouldn't be very good either, for the same reason that it isn't for SSRIs. So we said, okay, what are those drugs actually doing? What they're doing is targeting a very specific kind of receptor in certain kind of brain cells, where what you want to do is turn them down. You want to make them less receptive to serotonin, to endogenous serotonin. So we can do that now. We have ways of genetically engineering a particular kind of receptor and a particular kind of receptivity to serotonin. That's what you can do now with genetic engineering. And we developed a way to get it into your brain non-invasively. So most of the other methods that are being used for genetic engineering now, you would put a 6-inch needle directly into your brain and then inject it so that it's there. And we didn't want to do that because we figured nobody's going to want to do that. So we have a way of getting into your brain non-invasively. We know through proof of principle that tests that we've done that it will, in fact, change receptivity of certain neurons, and it also affects anxiety. So this is the direction that a lot of psychiatric drugs are going, to find out, well, what's your problem? Don't give it a name yet. Just say what's the problem? The problem is I get on an airplane and I'm anxious. Okay. What's probably happening is that there's too much serotonin being reuptake, blah, blah, blah. We can fix that. Here, take this, and this will fix you. And in fact, it looks like it does fix people. So it's at this point, we're looking mainly at relatively simple things like anxiety, but we think this would also work for dementia, and will work for Alzheimer's, and work for much more complicated things. And the reason we can do it is because there are tools now that allow it to be done. So the Nobel Prize was given to the two women who developed this genetic editing method this year. They got the Nobel Prize. So it's a relatively new method. We've been working on developing it as a new kind of targeted medical treatment, and it looks like it works.
In some ways, it seems like a bit of a contradiction to the ions thing. I mean, what about meditation and natural things for anxiety? I mean, isn't that also helpful in healing and to a certain extent?
It is. Some people can't go there.
Yeah.
Right. If you're very anxious, a lot of people can't sit down long enough to begin to learn to meditate.
Yeah. No, so I've come across that a lot. People just
So I'm talking about severe anxiety, severe depression. You become paralyzed with those things. And when you get to the state of dementia, and especially Alzheimer's, you don't have the mental capacity to be able to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's true that we think ultimately the brain and body can create all kinds of internal chemicals. Like the whole pharmacy can be recreated in our own body. So eventually, yes, we'll be able to do all of this without any drugs at all. But we're not there yet.
Right.
And some people, just don't have the talent and can't get there no matter what.
Yeah.
So this is I would say, an interim as we move more and more towards targeted, very specific ways of treating that doesn't saturate the body with the drug. Because as you know, if you watch TV at night and you see advertisements for drugs, then they'll say in really small type and very quickly, by the way, this might kill you. It might kill everybody you've ever known, right? This is an atomic bomb that you're taking in your body, and it's going to screw everything up. It might help you a little bit, but probably not. I mean, that's almost exactly what they're saying, because the contraindications are really, really bad. So we're moving in a direction where, no, you have a problem, you fix only that, and you don't saturate the body with all this other stuff.
Where can our listeners track you down if they want to get your books or figure out what you're up to? Are you on social media, anything like that?
They should go to deanradin.com. It's my personal site. Or they should go to noetic.org, which is the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And if they really want to learn about the rest of what I'm doing, they go to cognigenics.io.
Is that just how it sounds?
Excuse me?
Is that just how it sounds?
Yeah. Cognigenics. COGNIGENICS.io.
Sometimes they sneak an X on the end, and that throws
No,
you
we
off.
didn't. No, we didn't put an X.
We'll make sure we link to all that stuff in the show notes so that everyone can track that down. We really appreciate you coming on the show, and come back anytime.
Yeah, thanks, Dean.
Thank you.
This was fun.
Good.
Ciao for now.
See you.
Next time we'll try and make it so Kyle doesn't talk so much. He really is pretty overbearing.
I did have a few questions I wanted to ask, but I didn't want to jump in.
Yeah, you're welcome to jump in anytime, buddy.
Yeah, no, I want to ask him, having been in Peru just a couple of weeks ago, and we can't figure out how those giant walls in Cusco and Sacsayhuaman and the giant structures in Ollantaytambo, how they exactly managed to do that. And so it'd be interesting, not only how did they carve it, but we're thinking of it in today with the materialistic, what we can do with today's technology. Maybe they did it where we couldn't even do it. A lot of that we couldn't even do it with today's technology. Like at Ollantaytambo, they got those giant rocks up there, but one of them's at the bottom, and they had to build a road around it because even today we didn't have the technology to move it.
Yeah.
So using that manifestation that he was talking about, one is that possibly using that to carve the stone and as well to move it and put it into place so perfectly. So that was something I wanted. Was wondering to ask him about that. So
yeah, interesting.
Yeah, big thanks to Dean for coming on the show. Big thanks to Kyle for hanging out with us as we're quarantining here. Thanks to Graham.
Didn't really have much of a choice, did I?
No, you're stuck here. Thanks to Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Graham.
Yeah, we are outright blaming Graham at this point for our COVID, if we have it.
Find out tomorrow.
We're still negative up till now.
Up to now, but pretty sure that'll change by tomorrow.
Well, I'm still feeling a little tired and achy, so.
Yeah, well, hopefully you'll survive.
Yeah.
You're not one of those people that I should have got the vaccine.
I should have got it.
Take the shot. Take the shot.
Grimerica.ca/support if you can, when you can. If you're getting some value from the show and you want to send some value back our way, head over to grimerica.ca/support today. Sign up for a monthly, make a one-time donation. Head over to adultbrain.ca if you want to get some of those great audiobooks Graham's been reading, some of the esoteric classics of all time, including the latest one that just came out, Isis Unveiled, Volume 1. As soon as Lazy Bones over here gets over his cough, we'll get him started on Volume 2. And it's all fantastic.
Stop coughing.
Canadian shame, he's just faking it. It's not like school, dude. It's not like you don't have to prove to me that you're sick. I've seen the test. Canadian.shame.ca. If you want to get my book, head over to grimerica.ca/chats to get in on the conversation. What else? grimerica.ca/swag. If you want to get some shirts and stuff, contact at thecabin.com. If you want to get in on one of our fantastic events, we just had a great time down in Washington again. Graham got COVID, but don't let that slow you down. I mean, what are the chances? grimerica.ca/support. Thanks for listening. We love you guys. We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to the live show, guys. We appreciate it. We'll be back, I guess, next week. Maybe before that, we'll see. We might be doing some extra shows.
Yeah, we'll probably be back Thursday for that water show, or tomorrow.
Tomorrow is the water show where we're talking about fluoride and stuff like that. So we appreciate you guys turning on to the live show. And, hopefully Graham will survive his COVID. Hopefully we'll all survive. And this will be it. We'll just make some more podcasts while we're stuck at home. I think, everyone's going to be stuck at home soon, so...